At 2:47 in the morning, my grandmother called me from the Tim Hortons on Fisher Hallman Road. She was 76 years old. It was the third week of November in Ontario, and the first thing she said to me was that she was sorry for waking me up. That's who she is. That's the whole problem. Her voice was thin and careful, the way she gets when she doesn't want to be a fuss. She told me she was fine. She told me the young woman on the overnight shift had let her sit at a table near the heating vent. She told me she had a cup of tea. She didn't tell me what had happened. Not all of it, and I didn't push. I just said, "Stay there, I'm coming," and then I asked the question I already knew I didn't want answered. "Where's Uncle Brent?" A long pause. Not silence exactly. The kind of breathing a person does when they're choosing their words very carefully, the way you do when the truth sounds worse out loud than it does in your head. "He's at the house, honey. It's fine, don't rush." Kitchener is 90 minutes from my apartment in London on a good day. At 3 in the morning on a Wednesday, I made it in 78. I threw on a coat over my pajamas, grabbed the heavy wool blanket I keep folded on the back of the couch, and drove the 401 with the heat on full and my hands white on the wheel. My name is Laura Kincaid. I'm 28 years old, and I run a small meal prep business out of a commercial kitchen I rent by the hour on Dundas Street. I mention that only because it matters later. I called the house from the car. My Aunt Cheryl answered on the second ring. I could hear the television in the background. Some late-night program at full volume at 3 in the morning. She spoke first. "She made her choice, Lara. Don't make this bigger than it is." She made her choice. My 76-year-old grandmother was sitting alone at a Tim Hortons in November with her winter coat buttoned to the throat and her life in a canvas grocery bag, and according to the woman who had been living in her house for 3 years, that was a choice she had made. I called my mother next. Straight to voicemail. Then again 20 minutes later voicemail. At 3:30, a text came through. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. Sort it out in the morning, Lar. I've got an early shift." I read it twice at a red light somewhere past Cambridge. My mother knew her own mother was sitting alone in the cold, and her answer was her shift schedule. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and kept driving. I want to say something honest here. I wasn't surprised by Cheryl. Cheryl has never pretended to be anything other than what she is, and I wasn't even fully surprised by my mother's text. She spent 13 years rounding off Cheryl's edges in her head, making excuses, calling it keeping the peace. But that text hit somewhere I hadn't thought to guard. Because indifference has a way of sounding reasonable while it's letting someone freeze. My grandmother was sitting in a Tim Hortons at 3 in the morning, apologizing for waking me up, and my mother's concern was her morning shift. I found her at a table by the window, with her hands wrapped around a paper cup and a canvas grocery bag on the seat beside her. The kind of bag you get free from the superstore when you spend over $50. Her whole night was in it. The young woman behind the counter came over when I walked in. Her name tag said Bria. Maybe 22, maybe younger, wearing the brown uniform with the confidence of someone who has worked nights long enough to have seen everything. She told me quietly that my grandmother had been there since just before 1 in the morning. That she hadn't wanted anything at first, just asked if she could sit for a bit. Bria had brought her a tea on the house. "She keeps apologizing," Bria said low, "like she thinks she's bothering me." She glanced over. "What happened to her?" "Her family," I said. Bria nodded slowly, the way someone nods when an answer is short but complete. I wrapped the wool blanket around my grandmother's shoulders and sat down across from her. She was shivering, but her back was straight. She has always had a very straight back. She worked as a bookkeeper for the same accounting firm for 31 years, and she sat at a desk like she meant it until the day she retired. In the car with the heat turned up, she told me the shape of it. She kept it brief, no decoration. Cheryl had knocked on the door of the small back bedroom, the one my grandmother had given up the master for 2 years ago because her knees made the stairs difficult, around midnight. The knock didn't wait for an answer. The grocery bag was already packed. Cheryl said they were converting the room. She said my grandmother was becoming a burden the house couldn't carry. She said the house would be better managed now. She told her to take her things and go. My grandmother paused and looked out the passenger window at the dark fields, going past on the 401. She'd folded everything, Nana said. Kayla had folded everything before she packed it, very neat. The socks were rolled. She said it the way you say something that doesn't quite make sense to you yet, turning it over, looking at the shape of it. She said it twice. That detail, she said twice. I didn't answer. There is no sentence in the English language that would have helped. We passed Brent Street on the way to the motel. Every window dark, his truck in the driveway. When my grandmother had stopped being allowed to drive after dark 2 years ago, a decision delivered with great tenderness by Cheryl, who said she was simply worried, darling. Nana had handed over her keys without argument. The gentlest cruelty is the kind that calls itself care. She looked at the dark windows for exactly as long as it took to pass the house. Then she said something I didn't understand. Wait for the morning. Mornings show you things. I filed it away with everything else I didn't understand yet. The motel on Victoria Street had one room left. The heater rattled, but it worked. Nana sat on the edge of the bed and I sat in the chair by the window with my phone in my lap. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The adrenaline had started to drain and the facts were staying behind. I had the non-emergency police line half-dialed, because here's the thing anyone watching this already knows. That house is in my grandmother's name. Hers and my late grandfather's name, though he's been gone for 6 years. She never transferred it. The mortgage has been paid off since 2007. You cannot pack a homeowner's life into a grocery bag and tell her to go. One call and an officer back through her own front door before sunrise. My grandmother put her hand over my phone. They can walk me back in tonight, she said. But then what? I'd be living in a house with people who decided what I was worth at midnight. I don't want back in, Laura. I want to see what happens next. Something in her face was different from what I'd seen at the Tim Hortons. Not hurt, not shock. Something older and steadier, like a decision that had already been made a long time ago and was only now being spoken out loud. Let it sit, she said. Noise is what they're counting on, not ours. She was asleep in 10 minutes. My grandmother was a bookkeeper. She can sleep with a clear conscience because she always checked the numbers twice. I couldn't sleep at all. I sat in that chair and opened my banking app and looked at the payment history I had scrolled through 100 times before. Except that night it looked different. A scheduled e-transfer to a contact listed as P. Delaney. A utility payment on the 14th of each month. Property tax installments twice a year. There was one person who needed to know what had happened before the rest of that street woke up. I set an alarm for 7 and closed my eyes without sleeping. Pat Delaney has lived across the street from my grandmother for 26 years. She's 69, retired from teaching grade 5 at a Catholic school in Kitchener, and she was my grandmother's closest friend for decades. For the last 3 years, Pat has also been something else. She has been the middle of a secret. I told her everything from the motel parking lot at 7:15, the bag, Bria's tea, my mother's text, Cheryl's bedroom conversion. Pat was quiet for 4 full seconds. When she spoke, her voice was the kind of calm that raised the hair on my arms. Laura, honey, stop the transfers, all of them. Pat. You heard me. I'll make some calls this morning. And Laura, your grandmother left something with me 3 weeks ago. When you're ready, come see me. I didn't ask what she meant. My hands were already moving. Canceling the auto transfer to Pat's account, canceling the scheduled hydro payment, the home insurance pre-authorized debit, the property tax installment set up for December. 4 minutes and I had unwound a system I had spent 3 years quietly building. I sent Pat one message, done. Here is what Cheryl and Brent did not know, standing in that house at midnight while they cleared out the back bedroom. That house had not paid for itself in 3 years. I had, not with my name anywhere on anything, my name never appeared. The hydro account, the home insurance, the property tax, the furnace maintenance, all of it sat in my grandmother's name, the way it always had. But behind those accounts was money I transferred to Pat every month, and checks Pat wrote from her own checking account against bills addressed to Ellen Kincaid, and a system built for exactly one purpose, so that a proud, private woman would never have to be a line item in her daughter-in-law's budget. Cheryl believed the house ran itself. She was about to learn what it actually ran on. At 9:15 that Thursday morning, the furnace maintenance company called to confirm a service appointment and found the pre-authorized payment had been removed from the account. The woman who handled the accounts at that company was the sister-in-law of a former colleague of Pat's, which matters in a city like Kitchener. At the same time, Pat Delaney put on her good coat and walked out to check her mailbox at the exact moment her next-door neighbor Helen was salting her front steps. And Pat, in the flat, conversational tone of someone reading a weather report, told Helen where my grandmother had spent the night, what was in the grocery bag, and who had actually been paying the household expenses for 3 years. Helen has a daughter who works downtown and a very active phone. Pat has known this for 26 years. Pat is not a cruel woman. Pat is a precise one. My phone started ringing at 9:40. The first call was from Kayla, then 2 more, then one from Brent. On the 4th call, I answered and held the phone slightly away from my ear, which turned out to be the right instinct. The furnace company is saying there's no payment on file and there's a balance owing Laura. And Mrs. Delaney is out there telling Helen something. Is this you? Did you do something to the accounts? Mom's calling them now and they want money up front. Laura, it's supposed to go below -12 this weekend. I looked across the motel room. My grandmother was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, refolding the wool blanket I'd brought, corner to corner, smoothing each crease flat. She wasn't looking at me. She didn't need to. I brought the phone back to my ear. You first, I said. Silence. What? Fix what you did to her first. Then we'll talk about your furnace. I hung up. Nana set the folded blanket on the foot of the bed and said nothing at all. And I understood for the first time why quiet people unsettle everyone around them. I brought her home to London that Saturday. My apartment is above the commercial kitchen I rent, and the second bedroom had been a storage room for folding tables and equipment bins. Nana stood in the doorway with her canvas grocery bag and asked me what the rent was. Nana, you don't. $150 a month, she said. I won't be charity in someone's home again. I started to argue. I stopped when I saw her face. So I said $150 was fine, and she nodded the way she nods when a column of numbers comes out balanced. That first evening I came upstairs from a prep session and found her at the kitchen sink. She had emptied the grocery bag, put her things away in the dresser, and was now washing the bag itself with dish soap, inside and out, turning it right side and wrong side under the tap. She rinsed it, shook it out, and hung it from the oven door handle to dry. Later that night, I watched her fold it into a careful flat square and put it in the drawer beside the tea towels. It's a perfectly good bag, she said. I went to my room and pressed the heels of my palms against my eyes and stayed like that for a while. She placed her shoes outside her bedroom door at night, parallel, heels together, like a guest in someone else's home. She asked which shelf in the fridge she was allowed to use. Which shelf? 2 years of Cheryl had trained her to move through a house like she was borrowing it. Late that first night I heard her voice through the wall, low, just a murmur. My heart stopped until I recognized the tone. There is a small framed photograph she keeps on whatever surface is nearest her bed. My grandfather, taken in 1987, the summer they broke ground on the Kitchener house. He's squinting into the sun and grinning. She talks to him sometimes. Not yet, I heard her say, almost. Almost what? I lay awake for a long time asking. You probably want to know how the secret started. It matters, so I'll tell it the way it happened. October 2021. A pipe froze in the Kitchener house and burst in the wall behind the laundry room. The repair plus the drywall came to $11,000. My grandmother called me, and it was the first time in my entire life she had called me about money. My grandfather had been gone for 2 years by then. The cost of his last year, the hospital transfers, the medication, the personal support workers that OHIP didn't fully cover, had quietly hollowed out what they'd saved. She didn't have $11,000 available. She didn't have close to it. I paid it. My business was small but steady, and I hadn't taken a real holiday since before the pandemic. Her condition for accepting was that I let her. My condition was harder. If Cheryl learns the money came from you, she said, she'll learn everything else is empty. And then I'm not a mother-in-law anymore. I'm a problem. Brent and Cheryl had moved in 4 months earlier, sold their place in Cambridge, told everyone they were coming to help after my grandfather died. And I will say this, because it's fair, those first months Cheryl cooked. Cheryl drove Nana to appointments. Cheryl performed Care beautifully when there was an audience for it, but she had also, by that October, started naming prices at family dinners. What things cost, what she managed, who contributed. By the time the new drywall was painted, my grandmother understood exactly what my name on an invoice would become in that woman's hands. So we built the system. I sent money to Pat. Pat paid the bills from her own account against invoices addressed to Ellen Kincaid. My grandmother collected the mail herself every morning, a habit so old it had become invisible, and passed the bills to Pat at the end of the driveway, casual as a neighborly wave. Cheryl called it Nana's little walk. She did an impression of it sometimes at dinner. A small shuffle, wrist bent. There she goes, getting the flyers, only job she's got left. She never once wondered what the woman was actually doing. Contempt is a remarkable blindfold. The numbers over 3 years: property tax, roughly $4,000 a year. Home insurance, $1,700. Furnace maintenance and gas top-ups, about $2,000 a winter. With the pipe repair, 3 years totaled just under $28,000. Not 1 cent of it registered anywhere in Cheryl's picture of the world. There is one thing I have never told anyone until now. In the spring of 2022, I nearly ended the secret myself. I drove to Kitchener and told my grandmother I wanted to tell my mother the truth. The pipe repair, the transfers, all of it. Let her see who was actually carrying what. My grandmother looked at me for a long moment and then shook her head once. "Not yet," she said. "If you hand someone the truth, they'll thank you and move on. Some things a person has to arrive at themselves." I thought it was pride. I filed it away the way I filed everything she said that I didn't quite understand. It would be 3 years before I realized she wasn't protecting her pride at all. She was waiting to find out something about her daughter. The week after she moved in with me, I started seeing the previous 2 years differently. Family dinners I'd driven up for. My grandmother's chair pushed slightly back from the table. Cheryl finishing her sentences before they finished. My mother laughing along, smoothing things over, driving home and calling it a fine afternoon. I called Pat and asked her what she'd seen from across the street that I had missed. "You saw weekends," Pat said. "I saw Tuesdays." She told me about Tuesdays. My grandmother's car at the Swiss Chalet on King Street, more and more evenings. An old woman eating dinner alone at the counter 2 kilometers from her own kitchen, tipping in cash from an envelope she kept in her cardigan pocket. Because sometime in the last year she'd stopped trusting her debit card without ever saying why. Her porch light going on earlier and earlier. Her morning mail walk getting slower, not because her hips had changed, Pat said, but because it was the one part of the day that belonged to her, and she had learned to make it last. This hadn't begun on the night Cheryl packed the grocery bag. That night was just the night it stopped hiding. That same week, Cheryl sent a text, longer than I expected, the word sweetheart, the word misunderstanding, a suggestion that we all get together, bring Nana home, let the family work it through together, a heart emoji at the end. I showed my grandmother the text. She read it twice and handed the phone back. "She's not writing to you," Nana said. "She's writing the version of this she's planning to tell people." She was right, and it was already working, just not the way Cheryl expected. Because here is what Cheryl had misread about that street. She'd lived there for 3 years. Ellen Kincaid had lived there since 1989. She'd organized the block's snow removal co-op for a decade. She'd brought meals to every house that had ever had a new baby or a death in the family. She'd helped the young couple at number 41 fill out provincial disability paperwork when they didn't know where to start, and never mentioned it again, so they'd never feel they owed her. Cheryl went door to door that week with her version. My grandmother had been getting confused lately, wandering, not remembering things. You know how it can go at that age. And then, she pressed her hand flat to her chest when she said this part. Nana had started accusing Kayla of things, taking things. And that's when they knew her mind was really going. Hold on to that sentence. I didn't understand it yet either. But notice, and I didn't notice at the time, that nobody had asked her about any accusation. She brought it to every doorstep herself. Offered it before anyone thought to wonder. People answer questions nobody's asked when the question is already coming. The neighbors nodded politely at Cheryl. Then they walked across the street and knocked on Pat's door, and Pat, in the voice of a woman reading from a prepared document, told them what she knew. The Tim Hortons, the grocery bag, the bills, the 3 years. The street made its choice, quietly, the way streets do. When Cheryl went to the hardware store on Lancaster to buy a new deadbolt, a new lock, for a house she did not own, the man at the counter, who had helped my grandfather pick out bathroom fixtures in 2003, rang her through without comment, looked at her over the top of his readers, and said, "Ellen organized this block's ice clearing for 11 years. Cash or debit." That was all. In Kitchener, that sentence is a verdict. Then Cheryl posted on Facebook an old photograph of the two of them at a summer barbecue, both squinting into the sun. 4 paragraphs underneath about the heartbreak of watching someone you love decline, about doing everything for family and being repaid with cruelty, and a sentence aimed directly at me without spending my name. Certain people who insert themselves into private family situations to turn a confused elderly woman against the people who cared for her every single day. 68 comments by evening, prayer hands, broken hearts. "You're so strong, Cheryl." Relatives from Brent's side who had never exchanged 2 words with my grandmother showing up in force. My mother shared the post, no caption, just her name stacked on top of Cheryl's story like a co-signature. I looked at that for longer than all 68 comments combined. Then Pat called and asked me to come to Kitchener. Pat's kitchen smells like coffee and old wood smoke, and on her table that afternoon sat a small cedar jewelry box. I knew that box. My grandfather built it for my grandmother the year they moved into the house. Dovetailed corners, her initials pressed into the lid. She'd kept his letters in it for 30 years. "She brought it over on the 2nd of November, Pat said, setting down 2 cups. Rang my bell at 8 in the morning right after the mail. Handed it to me and said, 'If I ever call you from somewhere strange, give this to Laura.' The 2nd of November. 3 weeks before they packed the grocery bag." "She knew," I said. "She didn't ask me to hide it," Pat said. "She asked me to wait. There's a difference." I opened the lid. On top, tied with a rubber band, were some of my grandfather's letters, the ones from when he worked up north before they were married, and beneath them, wrapped in a clean dishcloth, was a small, spiral notebook. The kind you buy at a Dollarama, 89 cents, cardboard cover. The kind you buy at a hardware store to track measurements. I opened it to the first page and saw my grandmother's handwriting. Bookkeeper's handwriting. Small and level and perfectly horizontal, as though the lines had been ruled against a straight edge. She had written down everything. The left column was us. 3 years of transfers to Pat, dated and totaled. Pipe repair, Oct 2021, $11,400. Note, she said, pay it forward. She sounds like your grandfather. Each hydro payment, each insurance check, each property tax installment. At the bottom of one page, underlined with a single ruler straight line, $27,800. She thinks I don't count it. I count everything. The right column started in March of that year. March 15, debit charge, $87.50, Freshco. I don't shop at that location, let it go. Probably an error. April 3, $24 online purchase. Not me, not an error. Then 12 more entries. Grocery runs, a clothing purchase, a nail salon in Waterloo, a restaurant charge on a Thursday night when my grandmother had eaten alone at the Swiss Chalet counter. She had gone to the bank in person, requested printed statements, and checked every line against her own receipts and her own memory. She told the column at the bottom in the same level hand, $1,730. All Kayla. I believe all Kayla. And threaded between the financial entries, other ones. Smaller, written in the same careful hand. March 28, Easter Sunday. No place set for me at the table until I set it myself. May, Brent called from the road, asked if I'd had the car checked, didn't ask about my hip, still he called. August, made Kayla the lemon cake for her birthday, the one she likes. She said it was dry. Took a photo of it for Instagram before she took a bite though. October 9, Kayla charged $310 at a clothing store on King, wore it to Thanksgiving dinner. The color suited her, that's the thing that's hardest. I had to stop reading after that one. Pat looked out the window and let me have the minute. That's my grandmother, all of her in 11 words. Her granddaughter was skimming her bank account month after month, and what Nana felt, sitting across the dinner table watching her wear the evidence, was that it was a shame the color suited her so well, that the loveliness was being paid for this way. They called this woman confused. She balanced 3 years of 2-column bookkeeping to the dollar, and still had room in it for mercy toward the person stealing from her. Then I turned to the last page. The ink was newer than the rest. The date at the top stopped my breath. November 12, told Kayla today that I know about the card. Showed her the printed statements. Sat with her at the kitchen table. Did not raise my voice. Gave her until the following Sunday to tell her mother herself. Everyone deserves the chance to fix a mistake before it fixes them. I set the notebook down on Pat's table. November 12, a Wednesday. She had sat Kayla down, shown her the evidence, and given her until Sunday to come clean. And on Friday night, the one night Brent's schedule guaranteed he'd be 2 hours away on a run to Sarnia, Cheryl had packed a grocery bag and carried it to the back bedroom door. The bag was already packed when she knocked. My grandmother had set it in the car, and I hadn't heard the full weight of it. The eviction wasn't about the bedroom. It was never about a gym, or a conversion, or space. It was about a Sunday deadline. Kayla had gone to her mother frightened, and told the story backward. She's losing it. She's accusing me of things. And Cheryl had looked at that deadline, and made the fastest calculation of her life. A story dies if the storyteller is discredited before anyone believes them. Get her out. Get the version out first. Pack the bag before she wakes up and call it a long time coming. I drove back to London gripping the wheel. When I got home, I asked my grandmother the only question I had left. Why didn't you show me this the first night? We had all of it. Why did we wait? She was quiet for a full minute. The notebook isn't for Kayla, she said. Kayla is a young woman who did a small dishonest thing and let it grow into a bigger one. And it isn't for Cheryl. Cheryl is exactly who I understood her to be the summer they moved in. She turned and looked at me. The notebook is for your mother. I need to know what she does when she finally reads it. And there it was. The almost she had been whispering to my grandfather's photograph. The reason she'd stopped my hand at the motel. I want to see what happens next. The reason, 3 years ago in my grandmother's driveway after a family dinner, she hadn't let me simply tell my mother the truth. I had thought I was fighting for a house. She had already let the house go. She was running an entirely different test, and had been for longer than I'd been paying property taxes, and the subject was her daughter. The meeting happened on a Saturday in December at Pat's house. Neutral ground, not the Kitchener house where Cheryl had changed the locks, not my apartment where they could call it an ambush. The home of the one person in this story with no last name in the fight. Cheryl came because not coming would have looked worse than coming. She brought a tin of shortbread. The tin sat on Pat's sideboard the entire afternoon. By the end, it looked like a prop from a play that had closed. My mother sat on the couch. Brent sat beside her, looking at the carpet. Kayla was there with her arms crossed and her jaw set. Nana took the chair by the window, with her hands folded in her lap. Pat poured coffee like this was a school board meeting, and Cheryl opened the proceedings exactly the way I knew she would. I just want to say that we're all hurting, and I hope we can move past the anger and remember that at the end of the day, we're family, and nobody meant for things to reach this point. I didn't answer. I had made myself a promise before I walked in, no speeches. You cannot outtalk a woman who has spent her entire adult life rehearsing the role of the person being misunderstood. Instead, I put 3 things on Pat's coffee table. No speeches, I said. 3 stacks of paper. They either match or they don't. Stack 1, my bank records. 36 months of e-transfers to Pat Delaney. Dated, consistent, same week of every month. Stack 2, Pat's file. Her bank statement showing the corresponding withdrawals, the bills and receipts they paid, property tax, home insurance, hydro, furnace maintenance, every invoice addressed to Ellen Kincaid. Stack 3, still closed. The cedar box, sitting at the back of the table. My mother leaned forward and started reading the bank records. I watched the number assemble itself in her face. Cheryl read faster. Cheryl has always been faster. So you paid some bills, she said, recalibrating in real time. Through the neighbor, without telling anyone, for 3 years, which is honestly its own kind of strange. But it doesn't change what's actually happening with her mind, Laura. No bank statement fixes that. And frankly, she turned to Pat with a new angle already loaded. I do think we should be asking why a widow on a fixed income has been moving thousands of dollars of someone else's money for 3 years. Pat set down her coffee cup. She opened the folder on her lap and slid 1 more page onto the table. A handwritten tally. Every dollar in, every dollar out. 36 months. Ending with a $2 rounding discrepancy she had caught, flagged in the margin and returned with a note. Returned Nav 3. See enclosed. Check my arithmetic, Pat said pleasantly. Someone in this room taught me to always check twice. She's sitting by the window. Cheryl's angle stopped where it started. She fell back on what she had left. Her mind is going, she said. We've all seen it. That's why we're actually here. She steered exactly where I had been waiting 2 weeks for her to steer. I opened the cedar box. I didn't read anyone a single feeling. I read the right-hand column aloud, entry by entry, the dates, the amounts, the locations. 12 transactions, $1,730, cross-referenced against the bank's own printed statements. The ones my grandmother had requested in person, at the counter, like a woman building a case, because that's exactly what she'd been doing. I laid the statements beside the notebook and invited anyone in the room to find one discrepancy. Nobody moved. The furnace clicked somewhere in the back of Pat's house. You want to talk about her mind? I said, and I looked straight at Cheryl. This woman caught a fraudulent charge from across a bank statement in March. She built a 2-column ledger over 8 months without missing a single entry. In October, she sat across a dinner table, watched someone wear a $300 jacket bought on her stolen debit card, and her note in her own handwriting is that the color suited her. That's the thing that's hardest. I paused. Can anyone else in this room balance their books to the dollar across 3 years? Silence has a texture. This one was thick enough to lean against. My mother had gone pale around the mouth. Brent was very still. And then Kayla made a small sound. She wasn't looking at the numbers. She was looking at that last line. The color suited her. That's the thing that's hardest. And then down at her own sleeve. She was crying before she seemed to know she'd started. She spoke to her mother, not to the room. "Mom, stop." She told me she knew. She sat me down at the kitchen table on a Wednesday and she put the statements out, and she didn't raise her voice once. She gave me until Sunday to tell you myself. Her voice was coming apart, and I was scared, so I told you she was confused, that she was accusing me of things. And then Friday you already had the bag out, and I helped pack it. I rolled the socks because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and she stood there watching me, and she still never told you what I did. She's protecting me right now, and I can't. That is enough. Cheryl's voice came down across the room. But it was out. In front of witnesses. In front of my mother. The timeline, whole and undeniable. Wednesday, the confrontation. Sunday, the deadline Cheryl never knew about. Friday night, the bag. And then Monday, Cheryl on the neighborhood doorsteps with a story about a confused old woman making wild accusations. There was no version of she wandered off that survived her own daughter's voice in that room. And everyone had just watched Cheryl reach across and close her daughter's mouth by the wrist. Cornered people reach for the only leverage they have left. "Daniel," Cheryl turned to Brent, her voice sharp as a flag in wind. "Say something." My uncle looked at his wife. Then he looked at his mother. He reached across the coffee table and pulled the notebook to himself. He read the last page first, the November 12th entry. Then he went backward through the book, and I knew the exact moment he stopped hitting numbers and started hitting the other entries, the ones threaded between the figures, because his posture changed. I watched him find no place set for me at the table. I watched him find the Mother's Day entry, and then I watched him find Brent called from the road, asked about the car, didn't ask about my hip. Still he called. His own mother, keeping a gratitude ledger on scraps of his attention, recording a phone call about a truck as though it were a gift, because it was the only kind she was getting. My uncle put his hand over his mouth. And then this 56-year-old man, who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being just out of reach of everything difficult, sat in Pat Delaney's living room and wept. Not quietly, his whole back shaking, while Cheryl stared at him the way you stare at an appliance that has stopped mid-cycle. When he could speak, he looked at his mother and managed one word. "Mum." My grandmother raised her hand slightly, maybe 2 inches, and the room went quiet. That is the moment I will carry until I die. Everyone had spent a month calling this woman diminished. One small motion of her hand stopped 6 adults mid-breath. The person they had carried out in a grocery bag was unmistakably the only one in the room with any authority remaining. "I'm selling the house in the spring." 5 words, level as a ruled line. Cheryl's head came around. "I built it with your father," my grandmother continued, unhurried, to no one and everyone. "Your father is gone. What's living in it now isn't a family, and I won't rent my memories to it. You have until the end of February to make other arrangements. That's more notice than you gave me." She turned to Kayla. Her voice didn't harden. That was the terrible power of it. It stayed exactly as measured as the ledger. "The money you took, $1,573, goes to the food bank on Ottawa Street. Not to me. I don't want it back. $50 a month. You'll manage that fine. You managed 14 charges." A pause. "And you'll tell the family the truth yourself. Not a text. Your voice. All of it. Your mouth. Not my notebook." She closed the cedar box with both hands, gently. "Everyone deserves the chance to fix a mistake before it fixes them. I offered you that once. I'm offering it one more time. I won't offer it a third." Nobody argued. What was there to argue with? She owned the house. She owned every fact in that room. She had simply been patient enough to wait until her daughter was present before she spent them. Cheryl stood, smoothed her coat, looked at the room at large and said, "When she can't remember any of this next year, you will all owe me an apology." She picked up the tin of shortbread, she set it back down, she walked out into the December cold alone. My mother did not stand up to follow her. 13 years, I had never once seen that before. She just sat there with the notebook in her lap, her hand pressed flat against the open page, and let the front door close on Cheryl's footsteps. Winter finished the rest. The house ran on its actual costs for the first time, and those costs found the people responsible for them. The furnace needed a part in January, the insurance renewed in February. The property tax came due on schedule, indifferent to anyone's sense of ownership. Kayla made her first food bank payment the week after Pat's living room. The second in January. The third in February. My grandmother says the length is the point. Anyone can be sorry once. The payment plan is where the sorry lives. Cheryl moved to a condo in Waterloo in March, still narrating. Her version involves manipulation, a scheming neighbor, and a granddaughter who poisoned a family for her own benefit. She tells it to anyone who will sit with her. Fewer people sit every month. That's the consequence, if you're keeping score. No courtroom, no thunderclap. Just this. Cheryl finally owns a story of her own, and it's worthless, because everyone she'd want to tell it to has already read the notebook. The house sold in May to a couple with 2 school-age children, the younger of whom spent approximately 4 minutes at the showing before announcing she was adopting the backyard and would need a rabbit hutch by summer. My grandmother asked the realtor exactly one question about the buyers, not about the offer. She asked whether they planned to live in it. The realtor said yes, absolutely. The kids were already arguing over the bedrooms. Nana signed. On the last drive out of Kitchener, she asked me to slow down as we passed the street. My mother was in the back seat. She had been coming to London more often over the months, not announcing it, just appearing with food she'd made, sitting at the kitchen table for an hour before she drove home. The visits were quiet and a little clumsy, the way repair usually is early on. My grandmother tolerated them, then welcomed them, then started leaving the door unlocked on Sundays. We slowed in front of the house, and Nana looked at it through the passenger window. 34 years, she said, not with grief, just with the weight of the measurement. We kept driving. It's winter again now, and this is how our mornings go. I get up at 5:30 to start the first round of containers. By the time I reach the kitchen, the kettle is already going, because my grandmother is always up before me and considers this a quiet competition she intends to keep winning. She has reorganized my spice shelf by frequency of use. She has firm opinions about the correct way to seal a storage container. She taught the woman in the apartment downstairs how to make proper butter tarts, the kind with real pastry, not the frozen shells, and considers this her most significant contribution to the building so far. The clients who order weekly call her the other half of the operation. She corrects them, pleasantly but precisely, consulting partner. She still pays me $150 a month. It comes in a small envelope on the first, and on the envelope in her level bookkeeper's hand. Rent from your business partner. The first time I read that, I stood at the kitchen counter for a long moment before I remembered what I was supposed to be doing. My mother calls twice a week now. Real calls, not texts. Neither she nor my grandmother mentions Cheryl. Some accounts close without ceremony. You stop spending from them, and eventually the balance finds its way to zero. A woman at the farmer's market told my grandmother last Saturday that she had the best butter tarts in the city. Nana said it was nothing, and then found reasons to stand near the table for most of the rest of the morning. As for the canvas grocery bag, I found it one Tuesday when I was looking for something to carry the week's food bank donation in. It was in the drawer by the tea towels, folded into a precise flat square, waiting the way useful things wait when they know their purpose isn't finished. It was still a perfectly good bag. So now every Tuesday it carries what Nana helped me make that week, portions of soup, whatever we prepped extra, a sleeve of butter tarts wrapped in parchment, down to the food bank on Ottawa Street, where a volunteer named Bria works her days off from the overnight shift she still keeps at the Tim Hortons on Fisher Hallman Road. Cheryl told my grandmother to take her things and go. She did. Turns out she took the best parts with her. The bag that carried her out of that house now carries what she makes inside this one. And every Tuesday I think about that, about how the same hands that rolled her socks in the dark and folded her whole life into a grocery bag are the hands that run a straight line down a column of numbers at the kitchen table, that crimp pastry on a Saturday morning, that reach for the kettle before I'm even out of bed. Quiet is not the same as empty. And the people who mistake one for the other always find out the same way Cheryl did. In a room with 3 stacks of paper that matched to the dollar, waiting for an argument that never came. Nana flipped the calendar page this morning, first of the month. She stood at the window with her tea and watched the snow come in sideways off the lake. Mornings are honest, she said. She's right. I've stopped being afraid of them.